right. Good afternoon, everybody. We apologize for the late start, but technology is a challenge sometimes to all of us. So we take note of that. Sometimes these things that are man-made can interfere with many of us. Otherwise, this afternoon we are pleased. This afternoon, we are pleased to have Dr. David Ndii, who is a renowned economist, and we are going to try to have a discussion with him on issues regarding socio-economic impacts on and proposed solution, especially during this time of COVID and most probably post-COVID-19, if we will be able to have such kind of a scenario of post-COVID. Anyway, at this moment and juncture, I would like to welcome Daktari and allow him to know that we have a short meeting, and hand over to Engineer Linda Otieno, who will give us a brief introduction, then we can proceed.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, I'd like to let Diana go first, then I'll follow her to invite Engineer Matalanga and the rest.
Diana is out of the room.
Oh, she's out.
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Daktari. We are pleased to have you on board, and we are looking forward to fruitful engagement, not just today, but future fruitful engagements with all our members who are engineers. So I'd like to take this opportunity to invite our president, Engineer Nathaniel Matalanga, to take us through. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda, for that, and then welcome all of you. Welcome, Dr. Ndii. David Ndii, you might not remember, but we have come across each other's paths a couple of times.
I can read the face.
Good, yes, I can read, yes. So welcome, and I'd like to alert you that you have about 89 members of IK listening to you. Okay. And these are members of the Institution of Engineers of Kenya. Just a small summary, IK is a learned society of the engineering profession and cooperates with national and other international institutions in developing and applying engineering to the benefit of humanity. So we normally have such functions to meet and share information, and we are very excited today, despite the COVID challenges of having a physical meeting, we are able to continue with our activities. So my fellow members, fellow engineers of IK, Dr. David Ndii holds a Ph.D. from Oxford University. He also holds a master's degree in economics from the same university. Oxford is, I should have said, the prestigious Oxford University, and a bachelor's degree from our own University of Nairobi. I'm also very proud to say that I'm an alumni of the University of Nairobi. Dr. Ndii is a Rhodes Scholar and the Eisenhower Fellow. He has cut a niche in the economic development and governance advisory sector, taking high-profile jobs at the World Bank, the Rwandan Government, and Equity Bank. Besides consulting, Ndii has also had stints in academia, having taught at the University of Nairobi, previously worked as economic advisor to the President of Rwanda, the chief economist for Equity Bank, and as an economist with the World Bank, and in 2017 was ranked among the top 30 world economists. I hope members can clap for Dr. Ndii for that, one Kenyan among the top 30 world economists. Closer home, Dr. Ndii advised the NARC administration and President Mwai Kibaki administration on the economic recovery strategy, what was famously known as ERS, and is credited with the post-2003 recovery of the Kenyan economy. I'm sure all of us benefited. He was also a public finance expert to the Kenya Constitutional Review Committee of Experts He has assumed a similar role at NASA. He's currently the managing director of Africa Economist and a consulting firm. David Ndii co-founded the Institute of Economic Affairs, Kenya's first independent policy think tank. And that's why, Dr. Ndii, I think we crossed paths when Betty Maina was the CEO of the Institute of Economic Affairs. There was a talk you gave at the Pan-African Hotel about the changing scenarios in Kenya when me and you were young then, and we were very worried which way Kenya was going. And there was all sorts of scenarios where the rich would barricade themselves in 7-meter high boundary walls. Poor we shall try to break through to reach them. So currently, Ndii has numerously used his social media platforms to discuss pertinent issues facing the country, particularly the harsh economy and state of unemployment. Away from social media, Ndii has been participating in activism, forums, and supported reform causes, most notably the Okoa Mombasa movement. He is married to Mwende Katabaki, and the couple has a daughter. Dr. Ndii, as you are aware, engineers are producers. They contribute to wealth creation of the nation by designing and building infrastructure for the benefit of humanity. They drive production processes and innovations in industry and manufacturing. The engineering fraternity is honored and excited today, this afternoon, to hear your thoughts on the socio-economic impacts on COVID-19. Fellow engineers, Alexander the Great said, "I am not afraid of an army of lions led by a sheep. I'm afraid of an army of sheep led by a lion." Kindly join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Ndii, a truly exceptional thinker of our times, to speak to us on COVID-19 socio-economic impacts and propose some solutions for us. So welcome, Dr. Ndii. I can see a few people clapping on our chat, and you feel at home among us. We are all ears, and I welcome you to take us through. I know we have a limited time. We shall try to respect your tight schedule. Karibu, Daktari.
Thank you very much. I see you have detective skills in IK, because I don't know where you got a lot of that information. You must have hired a detective, or you must have spies somewhere.
We are an engineer.
In the engineering. I am very suspicious of who it is that supplied a lot of that information. I have my suspects.
Okay, welcome.
I have my suspects. Thank you very much. I think when one of your members, who is an old friend, in fact, from college, reached out, Engineer Jane Mtulili, she used some social networks to sort of reach out, and we had a bit of chat, and I said, you know, this is so we had a chat, and she said that, you know, and I said, this is sort of my thoughts on this, and she said, you know, that is very frightening. And then this morning I had a similar conversation with, I think, with Engineer Margaret, and she already started saying, "Is that so?" So I am sort of a bit apprehensive in that regard, that but the thrust of those two conversations was to point out that one of the things which is concerning me about COVID-19, and which I have had a bit from the chair as well, is what I have described as a passing cloud mindset. That, oh, this is something that we need to just wait out. And as engineers are solution providers. They think about solutions. We should sort of, it will require fixing one or two things. And so I will have to sort of sort of start my comments with a health warning that you need to brace yourselves for perhaps a different sort of worldview of what how this COVID-19 is likely to play out. But then it would not be of value if what I said would just be sort of confirming what the conventional wisdom is out there. I will organize my comments, because you don't have much time, in just three sort of points or three sections. One is just a brief overview of, can you hear me?
Yes, Dr.
Yes, we are hearing.
We are hearing me. Of just the facts. Where are we? Where are we with this COVID-19 so far? Then I am going to make some comments about the outlook and the outlook of where it's likely to unfold. That is inevitably and invariably going to be a bit speculative. And then thirdly, I am going to sort of speak to the question of engineer, which is really what your theme is. What does this mean for engineering sort of discipline and profession? And so I hope I can summarize each of those issues quite succinctly and quite quickly, so that we are able to then sort of get to the point where we can talk about, you can sort of have an interaction. I think the point I want to make is that, you know, we are about 10 months into this sort of pandemic, because there's some scientific, fairly solid scientific data now coming out from studies showing that this virus actually started around October, November. And there are already cases, countries like France, I think also west coast of the United States, they are already beginning cases of which they misdiagnosed as pneumonia as early as mid-December. So this thing has been with us for 10 months. And perhaps why it has been so severe in Europe is because it was spreading probably for about 6 weeks. It had a 6 weeks lead time before they actually started sort of seeing the climb. And we are still talking about something which is, you know, as if it's just a passing cloud. If it's already been around for 10 months, and there are still countries which are on a very upward trajectory, I think we need to change our mindset about the pandemic cycle. Now, in terms of its impact from the health side, and this may come across as some people finding that a bit, it is not as severe in terms of its health impact as the public sort of perception has become. And because if you look at the numbers, if you take, we have forgotten that people sort of, the global mortality rate, normal mortality is about 7.7 per thousand, works out to about 5 million deaths a month. In the 4 months that this has been in the headlines, you are talking about ordinarily 20 million people have died of other causes. Okay. But we have about 250,000 recorded deaths of COVID-19. So it's a 1.2, about 1% increase in the global death rate. So you would ask, why is a 1% increase in the global death rate so disruptive? And obviously, partly it's because it's very concentrated. Although it's a global pandemic, the fatality rate has been very concentrated, particularly in Europe. If you look at Italy, for instance, it is quite significant because it's a almost I think 17% increase in the death rate over that period. But it is also concentrated geographically, and it is constructed demographically. It is in just a particular section. So when you have it in a particular sort of hotspot, and on a particular age sort of demography, the old people, then it gets very sort of compounded. But we are responding to it more in terms of the public arena, without paying attention to the fact that you're looking at concentrations in particular hotspots. And we are reacting to that and instituting sort of, I think, overreacting, quite frankly. And if you say that, people might think you make careless. It's not, I think there is a principle we call precautionary principle in policy. And it is actually not wrong to overreact medically in terms of medical preparation. That kind of thing is the right thing to do. But then when you do it, you must have a sort of model of how you are going, how you are going to then, a theory of how you're going to manage it. And that's the thing. I think we have reacted without a solution. You know, if you react without a solution, you can find yourself stranded in your reaction. And I think we are seeing a bit of that. So we don't know. I think the critical thing about it is just, okay, how is it likely to unfold? That's where we are. The whole world, and you can see that where we are now is that we reacted to something we have never seen before. And it was right to react that way, because you've never seen it before, and it's good to be cautious. The countries which reacted very strongly have actually probably done better in terms of preventive and preempting the fatality rate. Those that were a bit cocky, like the US and the UK, are paying a heavy price. So I am not saying that it was wrong to react. It is probably the only thing that countries could have done. But the dilemma we now find ourselves in is the following, is that we have no exit strategy from that reaction. We have no exit strategy from lockdown. Yeah, we couldn't have thought it out before. So it's a dilemma, it's a policy dilemma we are facing. We reacted to stop this thing and try and preempt it even though. But now the question is, what is the path? What is the exit route out of these lockdowns? Any country which has attempted to do it, you have noticed. Germany, which was the one which was supposed to be managing it very well, they relaxed in the last couple of days, and the number of new infections are up. Japan went through the same sort of thing. From where the US, it's a cacophony there. That now what you are seeing countries which are exiting, trying to relax the lockdowns, not because they are confident that they have contained the virus, but because the economic pain is too much.
Mm-hmm.
You say this is too painful. We need to relax, but you have not achieved the objectives for which you did the lockdown. So that is a policy dilemma that it has created, and I don't think anybody has any answers. So I'm not saying it in a manner of saying that there was what is the alternative, but it's a matter of just capturing the dilemma that we now face. The policy community, whether you're talking about science or economic or policy community, is how do you exit? How do you exit from lockdowns? When do you exit from these lockdowns? What is the sort of pathogenicity of it? How is it going to unfold? So we are in a very uncertain situation. That is the import of what I said. If you look at the global situation, it is very, very uncertain. Now, when you are confronting uncertainty, the useful thing, a tool for making policy at uncertainty is scenarios, which engineer Matalanga mentioned. We sort of interacted when we did our political scenarios around 2000 or thereabout. 20 years ago, actually. So we have to ask ourselves what scenarios are likely to unfold. And I see sort of three scenarios. It's usually good to sort of think about it in terms of those sort of situations. I think our best case scenario in terms of the pandemic cycle is, I think, 18 months, 12 to 18 months. That's the best case scenario. And so we're talking about the very best end of this year. that's when the pandemic cycle might actually begin to look like it's behind us. Looking at the global, if you just scan the globe, what's happening, if you look at where the US is, for instance, 30,000 new cases a day, and it's flatlined like that for a month or more, to bring those cases down to under 1,000 will probably, best case scenario is August, September. If you look at Russia, where the numbers are still going up very dramatically, that takes you to the end of the year, definitely. So that's the best case scenario. The best case scenario, to my mind, is if you take sort of beginning January, when it really sort of was declared a pandemic, is actually 18 to 24 months. So we are talking about mid to end of next year. That's the base. That's what we should be planning with. We can be lucky, and it is below 18 months, but we should be thinking optimistically about 18 to 24 months. And then the worst case scenario is past 24 months. We are still dealing with pandemic in 2022. Not the economic effects, but the pandemic itself in 2022. Beyond 2021, that's the worst case scenario globally. Now, what's our case here? I think in our case, my own sort of sense is that our best case scenario is that we might actually dodge the bullet in terms of the pandemic. Yeah, we might not it might not get to the level where it becomes a major public health sort of crisis of the kind that we are seeing in Europe. That's a best case scenario. And that will not be because of our interventions. That is because of the way the thing is playing out so far. It has not affected our region and our countries in the same way as we have seen. Why it hasn't done it, we don't know. Whether it is coming, we don't know. Yeah, but best case scenario so far looks like we might actually dodge the bullet. The worst case scenario is a slow burn, where it is a late, so that we are late in the cycle, and the thing just sort of picks up slowly. And then we are looking at ourselves now, looking at, sort of 50,000 cases at the end of this year. When instead of, so that what you're saying is looking at it as a delayed sort of situation, as opposed to an avoidance sort of situation. And if you look at the way the numbers that we are now getting, I think we cannot rule that out. We have delayed testing quite a lot. We haven't done as much testing as even countries like Uganda, that is doing about 4 or 5 times as much testing as we are. But if you look at countries like which are like in the same situation as us, I think Ghana and South Africa, which have tested very aggressively, they would suggest that even now our numbers would be somewhere between 5 and 10,000. But if you look at the rate of positive cases from the tests we are doing, which is about 4 to 5%, then that if you project that even just on the population of Nairobi and Mombasa, the urban population where we think this is concentrated, you could be talking about even 50,000 cases now. Yeah, you could be talking more than 50,000 cases. Is it possible to have 50,000 cases and miss it? Yes, it is. Because if we had 50,000 cases and the same death rates, fatality rates as we are seeing in other countries, we are really talking about only about 20 or 30 fatalities increase a day. And our average daily fatality rate is 700 and thereabout. So if our normal fatality rate is 700, that's a day, and you have an increase of 30 a day spread out, we could actually miss it because our reporting systems aren't that good. They're not good enough to capture such a small blip in the fatality rates. So if you ask me, because the government is not putting out that much information, we actually I don't think we have an idea what is out there. So it is possible that there's nothing out there. and therefore we might dodge the bullet. It is possible there is a lot out there and we are missing it. Yeah, so we are really flying blind as far as the pandemic is concerned. So that now, what does that mean economically? That's the
question.
That's what you want to know, and but it's important to sort of understand that, to look at what do we know about the pandemic itself, the thing we are dealing with, so we can ask how does it affect economically. One of the features of this pandemic, I call it an economic terrorist. I call it an economic terrorist because the economic impact is actually, and the health impact are actually asymmetric. It is like, it's a terrorist because the economic, what it's able to do is wreak maximum fear. You know, the way a terrorist may be just one guy. Yeah, there may be just, we hear that there is one guy out there with a sort of, what do you call them, the suicide bomber.
Yes.
But you don't know where the suicide bomber is. So one suicide bomber can shut down the whole city, because you don't know, if you don't know which neighborhood they are, you know, you can find everybody has run for cover. And as long as that suicide bomber has not been found, you can actually lock 2-3 billion people down for time. And that's the analogy I sort of use economically, because we do not know. Because we do not know who is what is out there. The economic impact is being driven more by our self-preservation instinct, fear, because nobody wants to go out there and catch it. Even if you are told that you are not a very high risk, because young people still, you don't want to be that person who is the exception that proves the rule. Yeah. So there is a sense in which the economic dimensions of it and the pandemic, the public health dimensions, are now unbundled. The economic impact is happening independent of the disease, because it is being driven by its psychology, not by its pathogenicity. Yeah. So the economics is about the psychology, and the psychology is a different animal, because it depends on human behavior. You know, and the human behavior is a very different animal from biology. It's a psychosocial sort of things which then impact on behavior. Now, that makes it quite complicated to try and discipline. But I think we can look at it. I sort of tried to discipline it into three components of economic impact. One is the shock, is the economic shock, which we are experiencing, just the sheer disruption that is keeping us at home. Yeah, things not moving. Aviation has been grounded. Yeah, international aviation has been grounded. So that's just what we economics we'll call it a supply shock. People cannot go to work and produce goods and services and that kind of thing, and they cannot go and consume because they are sheltered in place. Restaurants are closed. You know, that sort of economic disruption. That's number one, is a shock. Number two is, you're going to see a fair amount is the behavior change. The shock itself is causing people to rethink their priorities in many ways. And you're seeing that, for instance, one of the things that we expect to happen, and this is going to raise questions about, is what actually is development. Development in the last couple of sort of decades has been very much preoccupied with economic growth and infrastructure and the sort of things you people do. And you get a sense people are going to ask now, what reorder priorities. You're already hearing that kind of language with people thinking more about human security and public health systems. In the US, where they have had this huge war about health, Obamacare and all those kind of things, you are seeing those sort of things beginning to change the way people think about the economy. So there is that rethinking of priorities is obviously going to have an impact on the economy, and that dimension which emerges from that is some structural change. There's going to be structural change, both driven by, which is the sort of effects of the shock, and some of the things we are learning from the shock, as well as the sort of reordering of priorities and behavior change that people think about. Just to give an illustration, one of the things that we have learned, and many, particularly global businesses are learning, is the risk of having a single point of failure in your supply chain. Supply chains of everything being concentrated in China. And then when this thing starts in China, what happens? Yeah, this happens. So you're going to see a change in that. As people respond and they want to manage their risks, they don't want that kind of concentration. So China is going to be a big loser in this regard as people want to diversify their supply chains. Already Japan, if you look at the package of economic measures that Japan is taking, one of it is to support its businesses to shift some of their manufacturing out of China, out of manufacturing, so they are not as dependent, particularly on critical things. You are seeing countries looking at things, some sectors now, which countries are going to be very conscious about some degree of reliance and domestic control over some sectors, like medical supplies. Because you realize that you're relying on global supply chains, and then something like this happens, and you don't even have gloves, yeah, or syringes. Yeah, I was reading some of the debates that they were having in the US about even if you have a vaccine, you may actually have a shortage of syringes and other things which you need to deliver the vaccines. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because of the global disruption, and they no longer have the production capacity for some of those things. So you're going to have people sitting back and saying, wait a minute. So one of the things, that's just to give of the sort of, you have this rethinking of priorities, people looking strategically at how to manage sort of the risks that emanate from this kind of thing. And then that will lead to economic realignment. We lead to sort of economic realignments of different kinds. And we don't know yet what character a lot of those, there are some you can see sort of signs like the ones I talked about, but others we cannot see yet. How long is social distancing going to last? And is it going to become a permanent feature of how we do things? I read a story the other day about a surge in Europe of the demand for plexiglass, the stuff you guys use to partition offices. And what I read from that, it looks like the open plan is out in offices. So you are now talking about going back to people having individual cubicles in workspace. The character of workspace might actually change quite substantially. Is that going to be a permanent thing? Or is it going to be a transient thing? We really don't know. But you can begin to see people are already thinking about how you reorganize the economy in that respect. Finally, just sort of making the highlights. What do these things then sort of mean for people like engineers? You can see I'm already alluding to some of the things that might actually have implications for engineers. I think one of the things I think we can be reasonably certain that about is that there is going to be a lot of re-engineering of systems. Yeah, as a consequence, as people adapt. Because what we're going to have to do is adapt. There are many things which are going to have to adapt to a new way of doing things. And that adaptation is going to entail quite a bit of re-engineering. So as systems are rejigged, obviously the engineers, the thinking, systems, how do we rejig transport systems, how do we rejig work systems, all manner of things. I think you can already see really that the minds of engineers really become very, very, very critical to that rejigging. But on the other hand, we should also ask ourselves, how did we get here? Part of because these pandemics, a sort of pandemic like this scenario has been predicted for a long time. And why has it been predicted? It is because of getting to the limits of ecological. We have sort of development, physical development, we have encroached on wild sort of habitats. And now the sort of pathogens that have the reservoirs of pathogens, and now we are reaping the whirlwind. The pathogens are coming at us, the ones which have been whatever. And of course, engineers have been part of this because you are the builders. You are the people who love to cut down forests and build things. So you build roads through them and dams and all manner of things. I think engineers are guilty of being too much thinking about projects as opposed to systems. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's for want of the knowledge or whatever to be able to think about, to have much more sort of holistic systems thing. I think it's more about the economic incentives of people. And I think this is something that engineers and basically all of us have to now start thinking collectively. I think this conflict between development and conservation, this debate on sustainability really now has to change. And I don't think it hurts. I don't think there's actually a real conflict between sustainability and development. The real conflict is between short-term gains of particular interest groups vis-a-vis the long-term sort of interests of society. But I actually do not think that there are any sort of real fundamental sort of trade-offs, because we have the productivity and the knowledge to be able to sustain or even to increase, to improve our standards of living without destroying nature. We actually can do it. The reason why we are not able to do it is because there is a guy whose capital is invested in coal plants. And that guy has political clout. And therefore that guy insists that we build a coal plant in Lamu. And then engineers now what to do. If it's a coal plant, then they have to do a coal plant. But if you told the same, if you said, no, we need the same energy, but we're not going to do coal. We're going to pay a little more money and do renewables, sort of clean technology, and tell engineers what we need is actually whatever. They will do exactly that.
Yes.
So, but perhaps it's time also now for the professionals to start saying, no, even if you're going to pay me to do a coal plant, I think as a matter of professional sort of values and conscience, I think perhaps we should think about deploying this capital in something else other than coal plants or whatever.
Sure.
So I think we are going to have, I think when people start reflecting different, we are going to have a debate about the sustainability, how this pandemic is really a wake-up call. Mm-hmm. Is really the wake-up, perhaps the wake-up call we have been waiting to know that there is a limit to how much we can sort of wantonly sort of use natural resources without actually thinking about the blowback on nature society. So let me conclude and say, I don't, hopefully for us, I think if our scenario is one where we dodge the bullet in terms of the health, the economy is going to be very severely disrupted, very severely. There's no two ways about it in the short run. There are some sectors which are not going to recover for a long time, like tourism. And I don't know how long it's going to take for aviation to but what we need basically to get by is food. You know, I think we are going to be able. We need to, if we can sort of focus on basics, we can ride out. We can ride out the economic crisis. It's going to be painful. There are winners and losers. But I think if we put our minds to it, there are ways we can mitigate. We can mitigate those risks. I think in the longer term, I think it's really more of opportunities to rethink, really how we do things, and to rethink development, and to rethink a whole lot of things, to rethink our health priorities, because we have now discovered that we don't have a public health system. What we have is a curative medicine. Our health system is basically just curative medicine. We don't have a public. People like Uganda have a public health system because they've had to deal with AIDS much more decisively than us. They have Ebola. They have all those things. So that's why you can see their response. They've got better protocols of dealing with this. But we don't. So those are opportunities for us to correct. There are opportunities for us to correct and change our course. And I think all professionals, really, and intellectuals and other people, it's an opportunity for us to play a more active and meaningful role in shaping how we respond to this. So I am not actually pessimistic. I think I'm looking at this as a wake-up call, a necessary wake-up call, and one which will actually then create opportunity for us to play more meaningful roles in society. So let me stop there.
Thank you so much, Dr. It was wonderful to hear such wonderful words from you. But now let's look at some few questions that are coming in. For example, 2008, I think somewhere in June, when President Kibaki launched the 2030 vision, and we had some pillars. We had 3 pillars: economic, social, and political. Let's look at the economical part of it, which actually is affecting now the whole country. The political part of it, we can talk about it later. Now, 2019, the economy grew by roughly 5.8%. 2020, there is we were expecting around, the CBK is saying that they will expect roughly 6. Now, with the COVID-19, then we must have to re-strategize ourselves. Now, what do you think are the interventions that are going to help Kenya to build a resilient health system, inclusive integrated crisis management, and multi-sectoral response, and socio-economic impact recovery? Touching on them in terms of engineering, because there is no economy that can wake up without proper manufacturing and proper engineering policies. What can we do to reorder our priorities based on the 2030 visions foundations?
Listen, the economy is going to contract. The global economy first quarter contraction is 5%. Yeah.
Yes.
The US, as of last week, I think early this week, has lost 33 million jobs. Unemployment is about 20-something%. It is only exceeded by the peak of the Great Depression in 1929, 1930s. And they're probably going to hit that. So economically, there's no point talking about numbers of growth, 5-6%. Those numbers are completely irrelevant. My own estimate is actually that this year Kenyan economy is going to contract by 3%. Yeah.
Yeah.
But at any rate, even though we have been having those numbers of 5-6% growth, those numbers have been driven by public expenditure. and public projects. They have not been benefiting people. The only people who have been benefiting is professionals like yourselves. Maybe that's why you don't feel it. But the rest of the people out there don't feel the growth. And that's one of the things which has to change. Yeah.
Yes.
So I am not particularly preoccupied with what is going to happen to the economy this year. Mm-hmm. It is going to shrink. It is going to probably shed something like 1 million jobs. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but that's the magnitude of the thing that we are dealing with. I think the thing which is a bit worrying mm-hmm. is that the sort of half measures that we have seen from the government with dealing with the pandemic, start, stop, you sort of half lockdown, not whatever, then you sort of, I'm hearing all manner of things. That sort of incoherent response. The worst case scenario is that we may have to keep doing this for the rest of the year. Mm-hmm. Then if we do that, you are then precipitating the worst possible scenario for the economy, is maximum disruption, because you are just reacting. So instead of contracting by maybe 20%, the economy may contract by 40 or 50. And which will make recovery very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. Or rather, the more we don't sort of intervene sort of intelligently at this stage, the more difficult that the longer it is going to take to recover. But I quite frankly, I would not be bothered about what the growth number is going to look like. Now, how do we begin to build resilient sort of systems and that kind of thing? Again, there's a lot of uncertainty. But one of the things that I think we're going to have to rethink is this state-led development thinking, like Vision 2030. Mm-hmm. Because when you shift your mindset from that kind of sort of state-led growth thinking, investment, infrastructure, whatever, state-led growth thinking, and we then start thinking about development as resilience, as self-reliance, and as human security, then the systems that you need for that are very different. And because that requires organization at a very small scale. So the smaller the unit, the more it can plan for its own resilience and survival. Yeah. Right. So yes. This probably works. Is probably we're gonna is probably more responding. The response is probably more favorable to devolution. Because even now, if you look, some of the responses we have seen, you have seen very different type of responses. But some of the responses that you've seen catching public attention have been from counties responding at their local level. Now we saw Mombasa doing all manner of things and whatever, and various other places. And the responses from, you can see how difficult it is to coordinate such a complex thing from the center, even for a country as small as this one. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things I think we are going to have to think is centralized systems of doing anything, including economic sort of things. Mm. And the other thing is that, as I said, we don't know how, I said about behavioral responses. Yes. We do not know how people are going to respond. Mm. What is going to be the permanent impact? I think in a place like Europe is going to lead to a very huge change in people's priorities. I don't know how much it's going to impact on us, but I think you cannot sort of begin to plan long term until you observe. What I think we need to be doing now is to ask which systems do we need to prioritize so that when we adapt them, so that we can then move on. And I've identified 3 systems in the conversations I've had. I think the first one is food. We need to make sure that the food system is working.
Yes.
The second one, after food, is livelihoods. We need to make sure that at least people have who are vulnerable, especially the ones who are losing jobs. How do you replace those sort of livelihoods, the one which we think are going to take a long time to recover. The third one, of course, is health system. You need to make sure that works. The fourth one is the financial system, because it can disrupt everything else.
Yes.
And the fifth one, which is actually our biggest risk, is the government itself. Government is actually the biggest risk that we are facing, the financial crisis that the government is facing, because that one could go down with all of us.
Yes.
If the government goes belly up, then everything else we are doing goes belly up. So what I think we should be doing is forget growth and development and Vision 2030 and where we are going or not going. Let us focus on the things that we need to have functioning.
Mm-hmm.
So as to just sort of ride this thing out.
Yeah, and Dr. Now, in your opinion as a policy economist expert, we had pandemic response and management bill. What are the gaps that you see that will affect engineering? Because for us to even have a proper food for the people because of the impact of COVID, we must have a mechanized agricultural system, which unfortunately is lacking in the country. So in the pandemic response and management bill that was assented to, what are the gaps that you think can be looked into by engineers and can help the country? The other thing is, how do you compare the Kenyan scenario and the Kazi Iendelee Tanzania strategy, whereby there's no lockdown, the people are working, people are doing things here and there. If you're sick, you can go to the hospital.
You are making some very provocative statements that like we need mechanized agriculture, because we don't. Uh-huh. You're coming from an engineer's perspective, and I think that's the thinking we have to change. Mm-hmm. Because actually agricultural productivity does not depend on mechanization.
Okay.
Mechanization is a labor-saving technique, but productivity of agriculture depends on biology and water. And actually, our most productive systems, like food systems, are smallholders, not large farms. Our irrigation systems have failed because you can have an irrigation farm system, but you don't have farmers. But that's a subject I'm not sort of going to. So I think we need to be open-minded about how. And again, we are not talking about anything. I mean, this is not time to start doing development planning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is a time of asking, how do we adapt to the changes? Like, for instance, do we know even if aviation recovers, and I think that's 2 years down the road, at least at the earliest, we do not know when the people like Westerners or high-income people are going to start looking at leisure travel, international labor travel again. So our tourist industry may not ever go back to what it was. That sector may actually die. So then we have also tied our conservation to tourism. So what we should be asking is very specific to how do we respond to that sort of disruption if it becomes a fundamental paradigm shift. Mm-hmm. Yeah. To the extent that we have become also tied to this China manufacturing global supply chains, if that changes, how are we going to adapt? What are we going to have to adapt? Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think it's time to take this development preoccupation out of our heads. Yeah, because after all, what is this teaching us? That you can do all the development and we all die in a plague. medieval plague, like 800 years ago. So what is it for? Yeah, look at the people who are dying like flies. It is the people you consider most developed. So what lessons are we learning from that? Yeah? So we're still preoccupied with the growth and more buildings and more structures and more mechanization. I think we are not learning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Your second point was about the pandemic bill.
Yes.
I actually do not think we have a coherent response to this thing, because when in policy, you answer several questions. The most important question is the why question. Why are we doing this? Then you ask the what we need to do, the how, by who, and by when. Yeah, you need to be able to succinctly frame those sort of questions and answers. And I actually haven't seen anything which approximates a coherent diagnosis of the problem we are responding to. What is the sort of magnitude? So what I'm seeing is, I think I have not seen, and I have checked, I say, you need a theory of your engineers. You need when you're building something, you need a theory, you need the science, and then the engineering, and then the design, your specific design. Same thing in the policy process. You need the theory. What is the cause and what's the effect? How does this policy intervention translate to a particular outcome we are looking for?
Mm-hmm.
So when you say you are giving businesses a tax incentive, we are going to give them tax incentives. The one thing that you can be sure that COVID-19 has killed for the next 2 years or so is investment.
Yes.
Yes, tax incentives act on investment. Mm-hmm. In fact, you can use tax and investment incentive interchangingly. Mm-hmm. So why are you giving investment incentives when in fact investment is the economic activity that is most disrupted? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think it's more not a question, just because the government has drafted something and called it a pandemic response bill doesn't make it so. I actually have not seen anything I can call a pandemic response done by the government of Kenya. You can audit that bill and find this action. What aspect of the pandemic does it address? And you just say, okay, in this action, what part of? And you see, it's just a hodgepodge of things that government. Some of them, 90% are things that government was trying to do before.
Yes.
And then they have now packaged them and say this is a pandemic response. What is that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would not, but personally, I'm sort of not paying attention because I am looking at the nature of the thing that is happening and asking how should we respond to this? How would I respond to this? And I actually haven't seen anything which approximates what I think the appropriate response would be.
Yeah, right. Because of time, Dr. You are saying that, in short, if, having analyzed what you're saying, it's that there is nothing like post-COVID-19. We have to adapt to the scenario. So in that essence, what is your take on comparing the Kenya situation where we have some partial lockdowns and the curfews and Tanzania?
I think this is an interesting point because it's also being debated in Europe, comparing, for instance, Sweden.
Yes.
Which did not do lockdowns, and people are looking as if the Sweden has then is pursuing herd immunity vis-a-vis other countries which have made the lockdowns. And then people saying it's Tanzania also pursuing the Swedish strategy. I don't know, but the point I can make is if you look at the level of social distancing and sort of people sharing in place, the reduction of contact activity in Sweden, it is actually the same as the countries which have done lockdown. So what Sweden said, which I think is very bold, is as we know, Swedish people are disciplined enough that when they are told what precautions they should take, they do not need to be forced to do it.
Mhm.
So when I saw data showing, yes, in fact, once Sweden people are told what they should do, they don't need to. So that's a very sort of sophisticated society where the government has trust in its citizens. But then the average Swede walking down the street has a master's degree. So that actually itself tells you, sort of the aptitude of the people you are dealing is the civic sort of culture there and sense of whatever is quite strong. So it is not that Sweden is pursuing a herd immunity strategy. It is pursuing a social distancing strategy, which is not forced. It's actually, you can say, is a voluntary social distancing strategy, which is actually working. Now, Tanzania, on the other hand, I do not know what strategy they are pursuing. I think the same thing as Burundi. But as I said, because if our scenario is the first one where we actually don't get as affected, where we actually get to dodge the bullet, then obviously Tanzania gets away with it, because they may survive because the disease has not hit us as hard. But if it is the other scenario where it's a slow sort of bad situation, then obviously it will hit them very badly because they have taken a riskier strategy. As of now, we don't know. Will the risky strategy pay off? The only country, as I can say, I mean, the country where you can say clearly they have pursued a lockdown, a sort of level in the high impact strategy, which is working, is Uganda.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can see them going out, they know how many cases they have. They have actually stopped the cases, the community spread in the country. And the 1 or 2 cases that they're identifying are in fact drivers. They're long distance drivers from Kenya or from Tanzania. So they are sort of around the border. I think, so Uganda looks like it might actually be able then, after a while, to open up more of the domestic economic activity. But of course, it is as exposed to the international disruption as everybody else. So it's hard to really react to the Tanzania strategy. I don't think it's wise. They could get lucky.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't make, luck is not, it really is not a strategy. Relying on luck is not a strategy.
Okay, I got your point there. Now, members in the audience, in the participant list, if you have any questions, you can raise your hands. We'll allow 2 or 3 questions because Dr. had another commitment and we have taken much of his time. As I'll ask him one question before he answer questions from the audience, we engineers, we believe we depend a lot on development blueprints, and development blueprints have brought up many of the agreements. For example, the AFCFTA, the Europe, the African AU that came in and is trying to replace the EPAS and others. This and Raila Odinga, one of the engineers who is also who is the head of the Infrastructure Commission of AU. So in our thinking, when we stop some of these blueprints or forget about these blueprints, then engineering completely is messed up, and even agriculture is messed up. Look at, for example, Bura scenario where there's nothing now going on there. So how will we be able to feed the people if we forget all the blueprints? That is one. Secondly, combining the reasoning, the policy economics reasoning and engineering concept. How do we now, with the shocks going on and the behavioral change that we don't know yet, how do we build up a scenario whereby the effect will not really mess the complete development in all sectors? Engineers are required everywhere, in the hospitals, in the farms, on the roads, in schools, in the universities. So and even the other professions. So how do we build up a scenario whereby these developments don't stop? We still be able to put food on the table for the professionals and also for the common mwananchi down in the village.
Okay, I think I understand engineering as solving problems.
Mm-hmm.
But you are describing engineering, which worries me because you are describing it as doing government projects.
But that is the scenario we have roughly in Kenya.
Yes, and I think that is one which bothers me. That if engineers have sort of become just appendages of projects, as opposed to society, I would be very, because if a society, I actually think my own prognosis is that mega projects are off the table. Mega project development model is off the table. It was the wrong model in the first place. And that's why it hasn't gotten us anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I'm saying this is a wake-up call. So what we want now, people, is if we are going to redefine what development means. And one of the losers is going to be these sort of unsustainable, ecologically unsustainable things you have been doing. Okay, so you got to stop doing those things. But that doesn't mean that there is no work for engineers, because even the things we want to do, who's going to do them?
Mm-hmm. True. But
yeah?
then again, look at it this way. We have many engineers taking up, foreign engineers taking up jobs from the local engineers.
I think those, to be quite frankly, that those are very parochial concerns. If you are not able to solve a problem, then really you cannot complain. And perhaps the reason why, look, if we are talking about food systems, for instance, one of our biggest challenges with food is not just production, but we also have a huge problems of post-harvest management.
Yes.
Now, there are lots of application of engineering to post-harvest management of food. Why haven't you solved that problem for us? Yeah. So when we start talking about food security, and we start talking about both raising in Kenya, definitely, and in Africa, we are really talking about raising smallholder agricultural productivity, and then probably developing post-harvest management systems at a very local level.
All right.
So if you can't solve those problems for us, then you are not useful. If what you want is a huge sort of continental Chinese funded projects, those are the ones which have gotten us to where we are, including importing viruses from China. So I'm polemicizing somewhat to make a point that I actually think that engineers are most useful when we have sort of complex societal problems of this nature to solve.
Very true.
Yeah, but then they have to apply their engineering science, not just the engineering practice of doing government projects. And I'm actually quite confident that engineers are up to the task, but they have to also go through a paradigm shift.
All right, that's true. I can
by framing themselves a different challenge. Not of solving a societal problem, not following government protocols, and following whatever protocols politicians are making, some of them which are not well thought through.
True. I
So
can
we are going to have to engineer like our healthcare system.
Yes.
And I think a huge component of that engineering is, of course, engineering.
You're right. I can see somebody. Engineer Howard, you have a question?
Yes, Ndolo. Thanks so much, Dr. It's great meeting you over this online meeting. But quickly, where does the money go? When I ask where the money goes, I mean, money usually circulates through the economy. When COVID happened, it stopped the circulation. Where did the money fly to? Just because circulation stopped. How should we understand it in a layman's language?
Money hasn't gone anywhere. Let me tell you, we have a very simple equation called the money demand equation, which says MV is equal to PT. M is money, V we call velocity of circulation is equal to price times the number of transactions. You're an engineer, so you should be able to follow an equation. Now, what has happened? The amount of economic activity depends not just on the amount of money, but on the velocity of circulation. So, for instance, if you have 100 shillings among you, okay, and you trade 3 times, you have done 300 shillings worth of transactions with 1 note. Yeah, it has exchanged hands several times. If you are not very busy and you only sort of trade once, the same sort of amount of money finances your transactions. So what has collapsed is velocity. Yeah, the money is not circulating as quickly as it usually does. So the money I have, which in one day could have financed 4 or 5 activities, because I'm at home, it is doing nothing. Yeah. So I keep hearing this question, where has the money gone? It's not money which has gone anywhere. It is economic activities which have stopped. If economic activity starts, the money will start circulating, because it is just sitting idle in our M-Pesa accounts, in our bank accounts. The volume of money is still there. It is the transactions which are not there.
Okay. Any other question, participants in the house? If I haven't seen your hands, I can't really respond to you. So, engineer, there's also one. Doctor, there's also one question that is bothering Kenyans, because the thing is, we have engineers in Kenya. We have been affected because most of the contracts have been given to foreign. In essence, look at, for example, Konza. The advert recently came out, and engineers who are actually needed, they needed the Korean nationality. So engineers are locked out of a project that's being done in the country, but the engineers being employed are foreigners. Now, there is also a push by KEPSA and engineers, professional bodies and other bodies for improved local content, whereby some percentage goes to the local professionals, even if it is a program that is funded from outside. Now, from your point of view, what can be done to ensure proper local content is utilized, or rather used properly, so that the common mwananchi can now benefit from it? Because when it's given to people, many people will benefit from it.
Quite frankly, that comes with the territory, because you are now talking about what we call this is global capitalism sort of competition.
Yes.
And one of the reasons why we are doing mega projects is because the people out there who are the money out there, which is looking for returns, wants to finance huge projects.
Mm-hmm.
Because they need huge transactions. If you're sitting in London or Japan or wherever, a project of $1 million doesn't make sense to you. So the project which makes sense is a project of $100 million. So the reason why we are doing huge projects is not because that's what we need, yes, but it's because it's what investors need. Yeah, they're driven by the nature of capital.
All right.
And you guys, engineers, when you see big projects, you think that they are good. They are actually not good for us. So I am not very sympathetic to the fact that local engineers feel excluded because those people are trying to maximize their returns on capital, manage their risks, all manner of things. The questions we should be asking is, are those the appropriate projects for us?
Yeah. Yes.
So I would expect a learned society of engineers to actually be a little more critical.
All right.
And then ask what, because then you would realize that if we really focused on the projects that we need, they would be smaller projects. That's what we need. In which case, they would not be interest of those foreign people.
True.
Yeah, because if you're talking about small projects of $1 million, $2 billion, a small micro irrigation project somewhere in Pokot, a small rural access roads, sort of things that Wananchi need, those ones the foreign capital would not be interested in. So in a way, you are your own worst enemies.
All right. I take note of that, Dr. And
Yeah.
I believe majority in the house have also heard you. Right now, I have Engineer Kiema with a question. Engineer?
Thank you, Dr. Harry, for those insights. I've got two issues of concern I want to share with you so that you can throw some light. One, Trump is saying that this thing is manufactured from a lab, that it is an attack. What is your take? Then two, citizens all over the globe, they are getting tired. You have seen some demonstrating, and this makes it even more dangerous now as we go on. What is your comment, Dr. Thank you.
You're going to hear a lot of, the Chinese also say that the virus was brought by Americans during the Wuhan military games in October, November, and it leaked from an American lab. And the Americans are trying to say, oh, the Chinese are doing this. So you're going to hear a lot of recriminations. But those, I think, are driven by just very traumatized people looking for someone to blame. I think when the science is actually in, the most plausible theory will be that this virus may have escaped, because what is known now already is that it's a recombinant virus. That means that it is two viruses from different animals which infected the same host, and then they sort of crossbred or whatever you call them. That's why they call it recombinant viruses. So what its character is known. The question is, did that happen in a lab or did it happen in a host? And I think it is equally likely that it is either case, but it's actually probably more likely that it happened in a lab than in a host. Which lab was that? That lab might be in America or it might be in China. Or a third country. So I think it's too early to tell those questions. People throwing accusations at each other is because they are angry. Some of them are trying to externalize their failures on other people. I wouldn't pay too much attention, but there's going to be a lot of geopolitical recriminations and fallouts coming out of this. The question of people getting fatigued, I think is what I was talking about at the beginning, the fact that we instinctively went into defensive mode. The world went into defensive mode with lockdowns. But now we are discovering that we have no exit strategy from the lockdowns because this is unprecedented. So the virus, we don't even understand it. If you look at, I try and follow the science and you realize there is very little that is known about it. We have even the little that is being learned is changing all the time. So there is no answer to that question. What will people do when they get tired? I think what you might find is a situation of what you might call a wave situation where countries get tired. I think it's people are relaxing the lockdown, not because they have defeated the virus, but because it is too painful. Then it's too painful, we relax. And then the virus comes back. Then we lock down again. Then it is too painful again and we relax. We could go on like this for 2 to 3 years. And actually nobody has an answer for that, to be honest. That's one of the, that's what I describe as one of the scenarios. No one has an answer. This is something that there's nobody in the world which is more knowledgeable than the other. Whether they are first world country or military superpower or, you know, the Burundi, there's nobody here who is on top of this thing more than the other.
So let me take 2 last questions and then we can release Daktari because we have taken much of his time and I know it's a topic that he is really much interested, so we can talk until the cows come back from grazing. So I'll take a question from Mwango and a question from Opati, engineer. So please summarize your question. Mwango?
Okay. Thank you, engineer and Daktari. My question is on the job market outlook. How is the job market outlook on post-COVID, considering the working from home experience?
I don't actually think we can begin to talk about post-COVID. My own sense is that as the pandemic plays out, because as I say, the economic impact is now unbundled. The reason why the biggest impact on the economy has to do with the precautionary. So to protect yourself from the pandemic, you have to shut down the economy.
Okay.
Yeah. So as long as the virus is out there, and you are trying to protect yourself, certain sort of sectors of the economy will remain shut down. Now, depending on how long that lasts, as you are doing that, the economy is slowing down, it is shedding jobs. It's a question of how much will it shrink by? And it's probably something between 20 and 40% in the best case scenario. If you're talking about between now and mid next year. 20 by 40% shrinking down means shedding the same number of jobs. As I said, the US has already shed 33 million jobs, the highest number since the Great Depression. Yeah, in terms of percentage and employment, the US unemployment now is heading towards 25%. And I don't think there is any reason that we can say other countries will be any different, because you're doing it to try, and as long as the virus is out there, and now the problem with us is that we fired the lockdown bullet even before, and we did not seem to have taken the precautions. So we have exhausted people, and we have not disrupted the virus. So that people are tired, but it is now that the numbers are going up. So now once you tell people, okay, since the numbers are going up, you have to stay locked down or sort of for another 6 weeks. I don't know how people will be able to take that, but clearly it will hit the economy even harder. So we are really doing very serious damage to the economy. I don't know whether there is another way. I think there is a way we could have done it differently. And we may actually have to then roll out different responses to try and provide the income protection and other things. If you recall, my initial call to the government was to respond to this economically on a very huge scale. And that was the reason why I was saying that. They did not think it was important. So now what they're doing is that you've got the economic, now you're trying to fight a very big fire by throwing water at it with buckets, because you did not sort of unleash the response that you should have when you should have.
All right, Daktari. Let me take these 2 questions and then we wind up, Daktari, because we started late a bit, and apologize for taking much of your time. I will allow Opati. Opati, your mic seems to be having a noise in the background, so please, if you're in a noisy place, tell us so that we don't allow you in. In the meantime, let me have Opati and Daniel, engineers. Are you there?
Yes.
Yes, please. You muted yourself again.
Hello,
Yes.
Daktari.
Yes, hello.
Yes, my question is basically on our situation. At the moment, already we have Nairobi under lockdown, Mombasa, Kilifi, Kwale, and Wajir. So what do you think would be the best balance for the government going forward to at least allow the economy to open up a bit and at the same time try and control the virus? So your opinion on the way forward for the government?
There isn't one. The only strategy which has been seen to work is very aggressive testing, and then you trace contacts and you isolate, and hope that you can do it on a scale that you are able to actually isolate all the infections. If you can actually, theoretically, if you can isolate all the infections in the country, in one place, and you are sure that there is no infection now in the community because you have isolated, and then those people, the ones who suffer symptoms, are then treated, and they only exit the quarantine when they know the virus is completely cleared. That is, I think, the only scientific thing that can work. The only country which has been able to do that on a fairly large scale is Korea. The other countries which have sort of suppressed it, almost eliminated it, have had very few cases. I think Taiwan had very few, and it's almost done. And New Zealand had very few. None of them had more than 1,000 cases. But if we, as I suspect, we have cases in the order of 5,000 and it's going up and they're out there, and we are still not mounting a very aggressive testing to identify all those cases, you have to give people incentive to come out and be tested and go into quarantine. We are still not doing that because we adopted a law and order approach which has punished people and stigmatized them for being infected. So we've made huge mistakes. You could actually turn it around, but you need to mount an exercise. And that will probably be, if we are sure we're doing that, we could probably do it maybe within another maybe month or 2 or 6 weeks. That's probably your best case scenario of when you could say that you have eliminated the community transmission. But we're not doing it. And I don't think we will do it, which then means that there is no safe time. So what we are going to do is actually just continue muddling through. And perhaps we muddle through and maybe the pandemic cycle just works itself out of the system. I don't know when that will be.
All right. Engineer Patti and Engineer Grace, questions, and then Daktari answers and we close up.
Okay. My question to Daktari.
Yes.
Yeah, I see Kenya in like 2 situations. Now we have got the coronavirus, which is likely to dock our economic growth to maybe close to 2%, the way some people are projecting. Now, I compare Kenya to a situation in 2002, where we had another virus called corruption, which docked our growth at that time to around 1.5%. And at that time, the country did some measures which pulled us out of the economic quagmire. And I could say a lot of those measures also benefited engineering in terms of their jobs. For example, there were a lot of roads which were given to a lot of engineers, and there was employment which was being spurred up. Now, I look at this situation of coronavirus right now, and you have mentioned, I want to look at the textile industry, which is really being used at this time. Is there a way that the country can rejig this cotton industry, will create a lot of jobs, both for the primary construction engineers and for the salesmen of products? Is there any way we can rethink like the way it thought in 2002 to bring back the economy to performing?
Thank you. Doctor, let me get the question, then you answer them together.
Yeah.
Yes. Engineer Grace? Engineer
Have you
Grace?
unmuted me? Have you unmuted me?
Yes, engineer.
Okay. Dr. Ndii, thank you very much for your insights. My question, maybe to be very brief, is also in the chat box. I'm asking, we have a lot of knowledge and good theories on implementing projects. For example, the big value projects are perceived to be able to impact the infrastructure positively and therefore bring about development. But we realize that the management of most of them has been so disappointing, with stories of poor quality, and therefore we get a shorter design life, which means that we don't get value for money in terms of what we should actually get from these projects. Well, what do you think we should learn? What should we do differently from your point of view, from where you sit? Thank you.
Okay. Now, Engineer Patti, you cannot compare this situation with the 2002 or any other situation, because in 2002 we were not afraid that if we go out we will catch a disease and die. And I think that's a very fundamental cause of this feature of this crisis. It's the most fundamental feature, that what it has, when you make economic decisions to do things or not to do, when you're taking economic risks, they are not life and death decisions. Okay. Now, there is a convergence of making an economic decision and taking an economic risk, even going shopping. It is becoming a life and death decision. Could be. In terms of the risk may be very low, but that is what you are afraid of. So please do not ask how we can apply things we did in the past. This is unprecedented. Okay? There is nothing we have done in the past which is applicable. Yeah. In 2002, what we had was that the economy we were in a recession because of politics of the Moi era, of the last days of the Moi era. And I was part of the team that revived the economy. And it was not very difficult, because what we started to do was to already utilize existing capacity, which was how we could sort of stimulate, because the economy had a huge excess capacity, and then you sort of build up from there. It was not a situation where you are keeping businesses closed by force. Businesses want to be open, but the government is telling them you can't open. Yeah, so you cannot apply the same sort of logic to a situation where people want to work, but they are unable to work because of the public health concerns. The question of project implementation, I am not sure that we can address this question in that context, because the reason why we fail to do projects properly, it has been mentioned, a lot of it has to do with corruption, a lot of it has to do with the projects are supply driven by financiers. There are all sorts of reasons why sort of projects are sort of embedded in our state and institutional sort of weaknesses and many other things. What, however, I think we are going to see, and I will keep going back to this, is the model that people like yourselves have been used to of doing things is going to be challenged very fundamentally, because people are going to ask whether those things are a priority. You're going to find people asking, okay, is this infrastructure project a priority? How does it help us in the event of public health crisis? So the criteria that are going to be used to evaluate what is important and what is important is going to change. so that I think you need to be prepared, which is sort of where I started in terms of the economic components. What are the lessons? How are the lessons from COVID-19 and how it makes us reevaluate what development means and how we should do it, what's important? I think those questions are going to change even how we think about projects and which projects are important.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. I'm being pressured a bit to allow one lady engineer to ask a question, final one, because
almost 5.
Sorry about that. Engineer Lucy, if you have summarize your question in 30 seconds.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ndii, for this opportunity and being very candid with us. So where would you say engineers can place digitization so that we optimize on digitization to adapt to this new way of life and continue being meaningful to the society? Now that even this webinar is part of us going digital, but how further can engineers embrace so that we continue being valuable through this media? Thank you.
I think technology, and not just digital technology, is going to be important. It's always been. It's a key driver. Technology is a key driver of social progress and social change. And this is obviously going to accelerate some technologies use more than others. And obviously, it's looking like people are seeing that sometimes behavior change is triggered by these sort of events. Mm-hmm. So that we are now going to discover that we don't have to meet physically. Then if we don't have to meet physically and we can do a lot more things virtually, and this is where the economics of it become complex. If a lot more things can be doing virtually, then you got to ask yourself, if you can use digital infrastructure, why do we need so much physical infrastructure? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it means that we probably, and this is something which many of us economists have tried to push, say that the solution to congestion is not just supply, it's also demand side. You have to ask yourself, where are people going? And can you reduce the trips that people are making? And now we are seeing this might spur the sort of digital economy that could actually reduce the need for physical, could catalyze sort of a demand side solution to urban congestion. Then I'm going to hear some engineers sort of becoming very uncomfortable because they want to build roads. Yeah,
very true.
So you can see what I'm saying, that it's a complex dynamic. The other thing which I think will struggle is now at very serious risk and was beginning is commercial office space. Yeah, now that you're seeing a lot of office workers can actually work from home and all manner of things, all these prime commercial office space that we have, do we really need it? Is it going to recover? Our business is going to reorganize and not need as many office buildings. Are we going to have, but if we are going to reconfigure those buildings and they become apartments and other service centers, who's going to do it? Still engineers. Mm-hmm. Isn't it?
Yes.
So I see whatever the configuration that will be required, it requires engineering solutions. Only that, and I think it requires engineers to be a little more less wedded to whatever project that what they've been doing, to I think to embracing change and asking and looking at providing sort of solutions to the responses that we need to respond to this crisis situation.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. for wonderful answers. We have a lot of questions in our chat box. I will try to compile them and then we'll send them to you. Maybe if you have time, you can look at them and give us some feedback. Right now, thank you so much. And I would like to bring in Engineer Ogai.
Thank you so much, Engineer Ndolo. Karibu Daktari to IEK. I think that was a really great, I think, insights into what is ahead for us. And we've been very engaged. I think we came in about 90 or so. We're still 80, so we are locked in listening to you. Let me start by first thanking all our members who've tuned in. I think we really do appreciate your time. And I believe this is some of the value we're trying to give by, we really need to rethink, as I think we've been challenged now. We have to rethink the way we've been doing business. We have to look at how we're going to add value. And I think that is what we are getting from the discussion we've had with Daktari here today. So I really thank you, Dr. Daktari. You're a great inspiration to us, I think to very many Kenyans. For me, I follow you on Educated Chokora. One of the few that I follow, and I thank you. I would like to also thank Ndolo and Diana. Diana is not here with us. I think you've really been, you've been the engine behind the webinars that we're using now, the platforms. You're the ones who helped us get there. We thank you so much for this innovation and for supporting IEK on a voluntary basis, actually. Engineer Jane, I would not want to not mention you here. You're the one who linked us up with your old buddy, who also somehow knows me from some other circles, but we thank you. Thank you, Engineer Jane. Thank you so much for your support always, even when we can't see it. Let me talk, the committee that has put this together is we have a committee we established, Daktari, which is called Policy Research and Advocacy. So I think you can see engineers are starting to do a lot more deeper thinking. And as you're saying, we want to challenge the development model that we're following, because I believe our skills are required. Whatever model there is, the skills of an engineer will be still required, and we are ready to live up to the challenge. I believe that's what we are here to do, to learn what's ahead for us and how we can re-engineer ourselves. What else is there to say? I think for me, I don't want to, we don't need to recap really what we have been told. We have we've recorded everything. We'll carry this forward. So before I wind up, I wanted to just call on all of us. I think I've had Daktari, he's a bit bigger than the projects that we want to continue doing. He keeps telling us, let's forget about parochial thinking. Yes, where we are is not about just economy at this stage. It's about how we are going to exist. Are we actually, and I think we are all going to look at, deeply reflect in terms of our business models and actually being relevant. I think that is what is coming out, because the problems ahead for us are many, and we must live up to that. Let me then just request that I have the committee and the council members. The council members who are present, I'm not so sure I have all the members, but I've seen Engineer Grace is with us. We have Engineer Ogut. Christine Ogut is also with us. I'm sure, Ndolo, you can give me a rundown of the engineers, so it's who are here, just to acknowledge our council members.
We have all of them are in the house. I've seen Engineer Otwani, I've seen Engineer Kiteme, I've seen Engineer Lucy.
Yes.
The only person I've not seen today is Engineer Ohaga, okay. But the others have been in and out, and Engineer Doreen, yes, I've also not seen her. So the others have been in, yes. But we are quite blessed today for having all those council members in the house.
I think that's just to demonstrate the kind of commitment and the value to which we have taken having you as our guests today. I would like to invite Engineer Lucy, who is our first vice president of the institution, and is also actually behind the organizing of this particular webinar. She would, I think, be able to wrap up and probably introduce the committee that has organized this. But as I thank you, Dr. so much, I think I've learned too much. I've been taking notes furiously. And in another life, I think I'll come in as an economist. I like that feel. I like your eclectic way of thinking. Thank you so much. Lucy?
Thank you very much, Engineer Margaret Ogai, for inviting me. Thank you very much to all the organizers once more. And above all, Dr. Ndii, that was a very candid, honest discussion of us rethinking our models and how to adapt, because we don't know whether we'll come out of it or it will be cyclically changing. So we are really challenged and up to the task. And to all engineers in the house, I think you all agree with Dr. Ndii and that we are going to embrace most of the things recommended and rethink how we do our projects, how we engage the government, and just how we think through our projects. So I do not want to belabor. He said he has another engagement. All I wish to say is thank you very much. We will be engaging you more because we really want to have the engineering economical approach to everything that we do. And we are very grateful that you took your time and you have even extended. So we are very grateful and we are up to the task. To all the engineers, thank you very much for making your time and all the way up for IEK and engineers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thank you, Engineer Lucy. Thank you, Engineer Ogai. And I thank the 77 participants in the house and more than 60 in YouTube. Dr. I will request for another session. Maybe we talk about, we have a problem with the registration of persons in Kenya. We can look at it in terms of how we can deliver services to when members are properly registered using big data. Otherwise, for now, thank you so much, Dr. Yes.
I think I forgot, I had been given a task by Engineer Margaret to introduce the PRA committee. Engineer Margaret?
Yes. You can.
So apologies for that. Maybe I was just so excited on the content. So on the PRA committee, maybe I can ask our chair to have the video on. We have Engineer Justus Otwani. I don't know whether his video is on. He is our chair. We also have Engineer Margaret herself, the ONSEC. She is also our vice chair. We have Engineer Shama Kiteme, and then we have myself, Engineer Lucy Wanjiku Mutinda. So we are very excited to have you all members tightly locked listening to Dr. Ndii. And thank you once again, Dr. Ndii.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. As I said, I will liaise with the office and then we will write something to invite you to talk about big data registration and how to deliver services to common mwananchi in Kenya. Otherwise, thank you so much. I thank everybody who came in and God bless you. Good evening, Dr. Safe journey.
Thank
Keep
you.
safe.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.